Chapter 12. Sight of the rudely spliced riding boot hooked on the bar rail flooded the sheriff with bitter memories. Memories of four masked men ghosting down as he dug sacks of payroll gold out of the mud on the Circle L. Four men who left him bound to starve or survive as fate might will. One of those men bellied up to the bar beside him now. Pat raised his glass, and as his head came up, focused the newcomer's features in the mirror back of the bar. It was a strong face, strong and unscrupulous, deeply tanned by the desert sun. The newcomer's blue eyes met the sheriff's with cool bravado, the eyes of a man who feared neither man nor devil. A curly dangling carelessly from the corner of his firm-set mouth, his long, loose frame was relaxed against the bar. From rakish Stenson to file-off spurs, Nels Larson radiated arrogant self-confidence, and the smooth, worn butt of the gun thonged down to his right leg testified he was ready to back his play any time. "Well, if it ain't Nels." The sheriff's tones simulated surprise.
"You guessed it, Sheriff. First time."
Larson's teeth flashed white against his bronzed features. "Figured you was down in the Rio Grande." With his left hand, Larson trickled a drink from the bottle a barkeep slid towards him.
"I was," he admitted with a chuckle. "But it happens I got itchy dogs, and reckon I'm just a tumbleweed rolling along, and the wind done blowed me back to Powder Valley."
"Heard you was prospecting," commented Pat casually.
"Prospecting?" echoed Larson. "Hell, what would I be prospecting for?"
"Gold," returned the sheriff pointedly. He noted the veil of caution that quickly dropped over the other's eyes. The ex-bronc buster slowly downed his drink and set his glass firmly onto the bar.
"You wouldn't be funnin' now?"
His lips twisted humorously. Pat noted that his right hand dangled above the thronged-down gun. "I believe I hit the target plumb center," he thought. Aloud he replied, "Well, that's just the talk around town, Nels. Never put much stock in it myself. Couldn't picture you nohow with a guinea pack horse and a shovel lagging it across the barrens." Larson, relaxed but suspicious, still lingered in his eyes. The sheriff's voice drawled on, filling the fleeting moments with small talk as he played for time in which to frame a plan of action. From the first he had suspected Nels, and the torn boot top supplied the evidence he was seeking. Nels was wary, but apparently was unaware that the sheriff had identified him. If he grabbed the Circle L man now, considered Pat, he'd have no clue to the whereabouts of the loot. Nels was no scared dance hall floozy to break under questioning or to quail about threats. He would play his cards close to his vest, and there was nothing to convict him of payroll loot and save suspicion and a busted boot top. The sheriff made his decision and kicked Sam's shin and moved back from the bar. "So long, Nels," he grunted. "I'll drop in and see you sometime." Larson grinned.
"I ain't saying you'll be welcome. You and me locked horns aplenty in the past, and ain't saying you'll find me around neither. A tumbleweed, that's me."
"What didn't you corral the buster?" demanded Ezra as they pushed through the batwings. "How come?" inquired Pat. "Well, he rods the Circle L, and his boots is stitched with the rawhide." "That one eye of yours don't miss nothing, does it?" chuckled out the sheriff.
"We can't jug nobody," cut in Sam. "The cooler's done busted wide open anyway."
"Button up," advised Pat. And listen, we want the payroll, both payrolls. Larson, he's cashed that gold, and he won't help us any in the jail. If we give the galoot his head, he's liable to lead us to it, and then we can pick him up too. The trio crossed Main Street and drifted down to the bench under the awning of the Jewel Hotel and relaxed in the shade. Almost directly opposite, the bat wings of the Gold Eagle squeaked on dusty hinges as men pushed in and out. Hat slanted over his eyes, Pat leaned back and watched the saloon. Before 10 minutes passed, Larson sauntered out and leisurely rolled his smoke, lit up, and untied a raw-boned bronc. With the effortless ease of a born horseman, he swung into the saddle and jogged down street. As he passed his estranged wife's little pie shop, June chanced to be outside, sleeves tucked up, washing her windows. The sheriff heard Nels hail her cheerfully. She pivoted abruptly, stared at him, and threw him, lips tight. Her husband's arm, half raised in careless salutation, dropped quickly. He hastily pricked his pony into a canter and was lost in a haze of dust.
Kind of appears like June don't hanker for Nell's company, commented Sam.
I reckon he done tried to break her to bit and spur, rumbled Ezra, and she stuck her bill in the ground and bucked. Takes a better man than Nels to break June. The Hanson are tougher than rawhide. Old Ollie, her pa, could have tackled his weight in wildcats with one arm tied. Well, time we get hightailing, reckon we'll mosey along Nell's trail. Half straightening, the sheriff relaxed and dropped back onto the bench. Hold it, he warned quickly. Neglectantly, he stretched out his long legs as if setting for the day. Sam shot a surprised glance at the sheriff's blank features, took the cue, and rolled a cigarette. Ezra hadn't stirred. Bulging over his saddle like a bag of jelly, Roly-Poly ambled over the ruts. The fat man's bulk waddled with every step of his big, rounded-bellied gelding. His pudgy features were creased in an amiable smile as he jogged his triple trin towards the numerous acquaintances on the plank walks. He, too, disappeared into Larson's dust. I got a hunch that bag of lard is Dog and Nell's, explained Pat, as Rolly's rounded figure faded into distance. Maybe we should just set a while and give his dust time to settle. Seems like the Circle L is getting kinda right popular. When Dutch Springs sank into midday siesta, 3 ponies padded over the yellow carpet of the prairie. Ahead of the riders, the foothills quivered like blue shadows in the heat haze. Coyote Ridge lay like a rampart across their left front. They hit the parched hills. Nothing stirred save occasional bunches of cows hiding in bushy draws. Half dozing, for he had been on the move for most of the past 24 hours, Pat tailed Ezra as they wound deeper into a maze of canyons in which Larson's spread nestled. The distant report of a shot punched thinly through the brooding silence. The sheriff's head jerked up, and, wide awake now, he listened intently. Another report drifted from the hills ahead, 2 more in quick succession, and then there was silence. "'Pears there's a fracas ahead. 2 guns, grunted Ezra over his shoulder.
Well, maybe Nell's cleaned up on Rolly. One less to cut in.
Well, Rolly claims he doesn't pack a gun, returned Pat, kneeing his pony. Let's get going. From the aspen grove below the spread, the Circle L appeared to be deserted. And then a pony nickered in the brush. Pat reined off the trail. Hidden in the chaparral, reins knotted over a pinion, was Raleigh's gelding. The sheriff dismounted, Moved his hand over the animal's dust-covered coat. It was wet.
"Appears like he rattled his hocks," he commenced. "But where in the hell's Raleigh?" "Slid down a badger hole?" suggested Sam.
Pat mounted, urged his mount through the brush towards the house. As the sorrel breasted the slope, the sheriff's searching eyes noted that the front door was wide open, and a window pane was smashed. "Grease them trigger fingers," he threw back. "There's trouble brewing." But no threatening gesture came from the silent ranch house as they piled out of leather at the smooth-worn pine hitching rail. Fingering the butt of his .45, Pat ducked under the rail and moved quietly towards the open door. Inside the house, Sam and Ezra at his heels glanced sharply around and stiffened. Raleigh's bulk overflowed a straight-backed chair, dripping red. A bandana was roughly tied about his right forearm. Wheezing with the effort, the cattle buyer was bending forward, head stretched over his protruding paunch, trying to staunch the blood that welled from another wound in the calf of his leg. "What's the trouble?" inquired Pat crisply. The fat man glanced up, sweat glistening on his hanging jowls.
"Assault and battery by persons or persons unknown," he chirped cheerfully. "If they'd placed that slug a foot higher, I'd have to find a hole I couldn't have come out of."
"How come they threw down on you?" demanded Pat, puzzled eyes darting around the room. Rowley's moon-like face creased in a rueful smile. "You tell me, Sheriff. I ride up peaceful like to dicker for horses, and some gent throws down on me from the brush." "We heard 2 guns."
"Well, maybe there was 2.
The bandage adjusted. Raleigh rolled down his pant leg. "Shooting from the brush?"
"You said it, mister,"
beamed Raleigh. "Then how come there's an empty underneath the table?" The sheriff bent and picked up a blackened .38 shell and then sighted another. Jingling the empties in the palm of his hand, he swung on the portly cattler brider. Raleigh's brow creased in perplexity.
"Well, they must have been laying there," he declared. "You know fat old Raleigh, he never packs a gun."
Gingerly, he heaved to his feet, balanced, and limped towards the door.
"Well, so long, gentlemen. This is no place for a peace-loving citizen."
"Hold it," grated Pat. "You always hide your horse in the brush when you go a-visiting?" Rowley's chins wobbled as he shook his head in gentle rebuke.
"It's not hidden, Sheriff," he corrected. "It's tied in the shade. Horses feel the heat just like humans."
"I was sure craved to put the heat on that hog," murmured Pat as they watched the fat man slowly wobble down the slope. "What in the thunder happened around here?"
"Seems maybe Rowley braced Nels for his cut of the payroll," supplied Sam promptly. "Nels, he fans a smoke pole, and Rowley jerks out a hideaway, and the lead gets a-flying. Rowley goes down, and Nels beats it."
He picked up the 2 empty shells Pat had dropped onto the tabletop and sniffed them.
"They've been fired recent. They stink of burnt powder."
Pat dropped the shells into a pocket of his loose-hanging vest. "Well, you heard his story, and I reckon he'll stick to it, unless we can prove he's lying." The sheriff jerked out his makings with a gesture of disgust. "If this ain't the doggonest case, every time we hit good signs, some gent fouls it up." Reluctantly, he watched the cattle buyer break through the brush. In a short while, Rowley reappeared, astride the gelding and winding between the silvery trunks of the shivering aspens.
"Well,"
Sam said, ever impatient, edging towards the ponies. "What's the play?"
"Mosey back to town," growled Pat.
Guess we've been eating dust for nothing. We sure won't be flushing Nels around here with this fracas with Rolly. Maybe he figures he killed the big slob. Maybe he just crippled him a purpose and cleaned out the cash. You can't prove nothing. Not a mile distant, the report of a single shot, sharp and distant, ripped through the sleepy air of the heat-blasted hills. Still as statues, the three lawmen listened. The echoes of the report murmured away into the distance. Nothing further broke the silence save the drone of flies round the ponies and the faint splashing of the spring. Pat met Sam's inquiring eyes. "What do you make of that?" he asked. "Maybe Raleigh shot a squirrel." "And he just swore he didn't tote a gun. Raleigh's too slick to tip his hand that way. Let's get going." The sheriff was already loosing the reins of his pony. He flung into leather, wheeled, and pricked the sorrel into a gallop, and Sam and Ezra trailed him. Clear of the aspen, the three hurtled down trail. It dipped through the sparse timber of a draw, meandered over the floor of a tiny valley, and then straightened as it shot through a boulder-littered canyon. It was in this canyon that Pat sighted the riderless gelding, cropping sparse herbage. He pulled down his pony, arm upraised to check the two riders drumming behind. The unwieldy body of the cattle buyer lay on the trail, flat on his back, his paunch curving up like a balloon. Pat swung into the saddle, dropped on his knees beside the bulky form. Rolly's fat lips gaped like a codfish, and there was no life in his eyes. With difficulty, Pat rolled over the slack form. A gray stain on gray shirt, below the cattle buyer's left shoulder, answered the question in the sheriff's mind. "He's bushwhacked." Sam pressed close, staring. "Nels sure had the last word in that argument, the darn sidewinder," rumbled Ezra. Pat straightened, eyed the steep slope on either side, and sprinkled with jack pine, patched with juniper. "The killer laid for Rolly up yonder. You go cast for sign, Ezra. This is murder." The big man toiled up the slope. Pat hunkered against a tree trunk and mechanically rolled a smoke as he eyed the corpse. Nels, if Nels had plugged Rolly, must have had a mighty urgent reason to close his mouth. He must have known there were three lawmen within sound of the shot, or maybe, Pat mused, he didn't. With a fortune and loot gold at stake, Nels was too shrewd to take chances. Ezra was ferreting around high on the slope. Presently he came sliding down, crashing through the thin brush. He tossed an empty shell towards the sheriff. "Winchester." "Whose?" inquired Pat. "Nels Larson," gritted the redhead. "Leastways he forks Nels' horse. The critter's soft-shoed and pads a mite. He hightailed her over the ridge." "Well, I guess we gotta pack this big pig back into town." Pat rose and stamped out his butt. Sam's inquisitive fingers were exploring the dead man's pockets. "Holy rattlesnakes, puppies!" he ejected. "Take a look at this." He held up a pair of light steel handcuffs. A quick step and the sheriff was beside him. Pat threw open the dusty, unbuttoned vest. Sewn on the inside lining was a metal badge. "Well, I'll be jiggered," he rapped out. "Can you beat that? He's a Pinkerton man." End of chapter 12.